Thank you, Sister Nina, for that gracious introduction. You are an example of God's grace. You're a blessing in so many ways. It's a delight to be here with you. I'm debating whether I should put on my reading glasses. I'm getting of that age where I need to, so I'm going to switch. Is that okay? I'm watching my time. Mine is an abiding faith in the capacity of everyday, ordinary people to be otherwise. And in our ability, no matter the evils that threaten to overwhelm, to fight for a more just world. That faith isn't naive or a fantastical evasion of the ugliness of human beings. There's too much evidence to deny that. Instead, it reflects my willingness to run ahead of the evidence, to quote William James, to see beyond the limit conditions of my current experience and to ready myself to act on behalf of something not yet in existence. It is also part of my inheritance, a faith bequeathed to me by those unknown souls who survived the absurdity of the American project when they could have easily chosen death. In so many ways, that formulation is at the heart of this book, We Are the Leaders We've Been Looking For. It's my attempt to think through Emerson and Dewey and Ralph Ellison and James Baldwin to find resources to imagine a way of being in the world that affirms our capacities to transform it. In my work, I've sought to ground that faith in a politics that affirm the capacities of people to be the change agents we so desperately need. I do not want us to lose sight of our individual powers in the excitement and glamour surrounding a politician who will inevitably disappoint, or to outsource our needs and desires to a political class interested mostly in its own well-being. Instead, I want us to see the revolutionary possibility in self-cultivation on behalf of justice, right? That in the effort to become the kinds of people democracies require, the kinds of people a racially just society demands, we transform our conditions of living. James Baldwin insisted that the messiness of the world was in part a reflection of the messiness of our interior lives. We got a lot of wounded people running this country right now. And this claim doesn't deny the workings of capital or the power of oligarchs or the pervasiveness of systems of racial oppression. That would be foolish and naive. Baldwin insisted, and rightly so, that human beings have a role to play, not as mindless pawns moved about by unseen forces or by the inevitable march of history or by the hideously petty nature of life itself, but that our choices matter because all is not settled. We matter because we are reacting, experimenting, feeling, concerned with influencing the direction of our encounters in such a way that will benefit and not harm. And those actions, in turn, shape our environments. As such, the question of who we take ourselves to be, a question of the character of the people making choices, becomes a central feature of democratic practice. I mean, Madison talked about that, yes? It takes a certain kind of virtuous person for democracies to work. And in some ways, what I'm trying to do here is think through my own pragmatist commitments. Those of you who are familiar with William James and John Dewey, you should hear echoes of that, but I'm trying to bring them across the railroad tracks. And those of you who don't know what that reference means, some of you are old enough to know. I just tickled myself. Baldwin believed, and so do I, that we have to become better people if we are to change the world. And he believed, and so do I, that we can be better by, quote, being open to the claims of different ends. That's Dewey's language. Of imagining a different way of living with others and of doing the hard work ourselves of changing the world, not handing it over to so-called prophets and heroes. And this is at the heart of what I call black democratic perfectionism. Black democratic perfectionism is that effort at self-cultivation, of tending to the state of one's soul in the context of a society shaped by the value gap that distorts and disfigures our characters. In the quest to be better under such conditions, matters of justice become critical to one's efforts to reach for a higher self because unjust arrangements and practices block the way forward. James W.C. Pennington, who wrote The Fugitive Blacksmith, he was Frederick Douglass before Frederick Douglass, said, "All that I ever wanted to do was to make myself more efficient for good." But he despised slavery because slavery had robbed him of his education, had robbed him of his ability to what? Acquire the information necessary to become a better human being. So what he was saying is that in my effort to reach for a higher self, the world as it has been organized got in the way. So it's not enough to just engage in self-cultivation. The material conditions under which one tries to reach for a better self, a higher self, must also be addressed. Among the darker souls of this nation, that struggle for a higher self under captive conditions can be seen across generations. People struggling today, for example, in a world where concentrated power has distorted so much of what is meaningful and obscured so much of what is possible. Black democratic perfectionism insists on the role and place of the individual quest as a core feature of a creative democratic practice and a radical politics that foreground the transformative power of everyday people. We are not slaves or the mere objects of anti-blackness. We are more than dire descriptions of a world predicated on our subjection and degradation and death with no room for redemption. Instead, we are the inheritors of a grand tradition, agent patience, confronted with the world on the verge of collapse, and what we do in the face of evils that threaten to consume us all matters for a new world desperate to come into being. And it matters in our individual efforts to reach for a higher self, to be the kinds of people that world needs. Obviously, I'm not an Afro-pessimist. I've argued for years now, before Afro-pessimism swept through the academy, that the pessimist is best perhaps understood as the optimist who has pitched his ideals a bit too high. The equivalent of Voltaire's Pangloss desperately trying to find his footing because this garden was not enough. Given that ours is not the best of all possible worlds, the pessimist concludes, as the philosopher Schopenhauer noted, that our world must be hell, where we are, quote, on the one hand, the tormented souls, and on the other hand, the devils in it. The pessimist has thrown up her hands and in some way resigned herself to the impossibility of the world becoming otherwise, and inadvertently has given license to unbridled selfishness. As a philosophical pragmatist, I reject this view. Not so much because I am a healthy-minded optimist, but rather because I understand that to act in the world involves suffering and possibility. This is the double connection of experience. It is, quote, primarily a process of undergoing, a process of standing something, of suffering and passion, of affection in the literal sense of the term, end quote. It also involves our acting, reacting, experimenting, and tinkering with the environment. That we can do. In fact, improve or transform our conditions of living. We are not stuck with the world where all is settled beforehand and where we are left to sit on our hands to praise or lament. Much more is required if salvation, rightly understood, is to be had. Mine is a faith that we act intelligently with imagination. That if we act intelligently and with imagination, we can change ourselves and our world for the better, but the outcomes are not guaranteed. The world is a fraught and vexing place, precarious and perilous, with a history that is a thicket of thorns. Acting in such a world is no sunny walk in the park. As James Baldwin wrote in The Fire Next Time, quote, to act is to be committed, and to be committed is to be in danger. I know that intimately. The world can be either saved or it can go to hell. Of course, there is the muddle of what Gwendolyn Brooks called the living in the along, but it all depends on what we do. One can hold a faith in the ability of ordinary people to fight for freedom without the comforting illusion that no matter what we do, all will be good. The illusion, that illusion, is a child's conceit. To resist conformity and to struggle for a more just world does not require that we deny living amid the wild beast, as Frederick Douglass said. We must acknowledge that the persistence of evils often frustrates our effort at self-cultivation. No matter, we must act anyway because a better world, if it is to be, depends on us and nothing else. I've always found Toni Morrison's novel, Beloved, illustrative of the view that I'm commending. Set in Cincinnati during Reconstruction, we are confronted with characters like Sethe, Baby Suggs, and Paul D., who are shaped by the horrors of slavery and desperate to hold back memories of experiences at the Sweet Home Plantation. Those experiences inform who they take themselves to be and ominously shadow who they imagine themselves becoming. Denver, a child who never experienced slavery, but whose life has been shaped by the experience and the hard choices it exacted from her mother who murdered her sister, Beloved, to prevent her return to slavery. Denver strains to imagine herself on her own terms as history distorts and consumes. Haunted by history, embodied in the ghost, Beloved, all the characters at 124 Bluestone Road struggle to reach for better selves. In the end, Morrison offers a relentlessly brutal picture of the context in which this desire for a better future is expressed and doubted. No one is left untouched. The psychical and physical toll of slavery cannot be left aside. Its effects intrude upon and infect new experiences, even the experience of love. The foul stench covers all involved. In a moment of dizzying doubt and clarity, the character Stampede, who works on the Underground Railroad and helps Sethe to freedom, says, quote, "White people believe that whatever the manners, under every dark skin was a jungle, swift, unnavigable waters, swinging, screaming baboons, sleeping snakes, red gums ready for their sweet white blood," end quote. And for Stampede, quote, "The more colored people spent their strength trying to convince them how gentle they were, how clever and loving, how human, the more they used themselves up to persuade whites of something Negroes believed could not be questioned. The deeper and more tangled the jungle grew inside," end quote. This is the world, with its insidious assumptions about who we are and what we're capable of, in which Sethe asked Paul D. that profound question, me, in response to his loving assertion that she was her best thing. Doubt and despair threaten to consume. But then Stampede turns the tables, and his insight, among others in the novel, sets the stage for a kind of revolutionary possibility, right? It opens space for a different kind of imagining and a different way of being in the world. Quote, "But it wasn't the jungle blacks brought with them to this place from the other livable place. It was the jungle white folk planted in them. And it grew, it spread in through an afterlife. It spread until it invaded the whites who made it, touched them, everyone, changed and altered them, made them bloody, silly, worse than even they wanted to be. So scared were they of the jungle they had made. The screaming baboon lived under their own white skin. The red gums were their own," end quote. Stampede's insight here breaks open space for a different kind of imagining, an epistemic eruption. That might be too much like Iliada, but an epistemic eruption that allows for the possibility of a self not consumed with what they think and do, even as one must be intimately aware of the dangers they present. Another critical moment in the novel. I got 6 minutes. That illustrates the perilous context of self-cultivation, involves an exchange between Baby Suggs and Denver. Denver has realized that the ghost is literally consuming her mother. Beloved is literally consuming her mother, that neither Beloved or Sethe seem to care what the next day might bring. They're living in that horror of the past, the terror of history, as it were. She has decided to risk herself, that is Denver, and to step off the edge of the world if Sethe is to be saved. And for much of her life, Denver's self-imagining has been bound up and warped by the cruel realities of slavery and her mother's act of infanticide. She has lived retrospectively, obsessed with the epic story of her birth, her mother's escape from slavery and the actions of a poor white woman, her namesake who desired velvet in Boston and who helped bring her life into the world. Denver has been comforted by the illusion that caring for the ghost, beloved, that serving as a caretaker and protector of the wounds of the past amounted to a meaningful life, only to see the memories of the past swallow everything whole like a sweet piece of saltwater taffy. Denver decides to wake from her slumber and seek help for her mother and, by extension, herself. This relationship to the past should remind one of Nietzsche and T.S. Eliot's Burnt Norton. I'm acting like too much like Cornel West now. But anyway, but she hesitates. Denver hesitates. The dangers of the world and of the people in it seize her imagination and her feet. She cannot move. Out there, she says, out there where there were places in which things so bad had happened that when you went near them, it would happen again. Like Sweet Home, where time didn't pass and where, like her mother said, the bad was waiting for her as well, end quote. Denver remembers a conversation between Baby Suggs and Setha where her grandmother dismisses anything redemptive about white people, anything redemptive about the world that they've created. Quote, "Don't box with me," Baby Suggs tells Setha. "There's more of us they drowned than there's all of them ever lived from the start of time. Lay down your sword. This ain't a battle. This is a rout," end quote. And with those words ringing in her head, Denver cannot leave the porch. She cannot step off the edge of the world. But then she hears the words of Baby Suggs, the grandmother who died pondering colors. "You mean I never told you nothing about Carolina, about your daddy? You don't remember nothing about how come I walked the way I do and about your mother's feet, not to speak of her back? I never. That's why you can't walk down these steps. My Jesus, my. But you said there was no defense." There ain't. Then what do I do? Know it and gone out the yard. Gone, end quote. Here, the past does not consume or occupy the imagination like a jealous maiden. Instead, Baby Suggs offers a realistic description of the world and its evils, not to elicit resignation or a pessimistic outlook, but to inform Denver's decision to act in such a world. Know it and gone out the yard. Go on. Know of the pain and suffering of black people, the bones soldered to bone that undergird much of our way of life. Feel it in the marrow and act anyway. The past is transformed from cage to funded experience. After hearing Baby Suggs' word, Denver says to herself, it came back. A dozen years had passed, and the way came back. Those memories would then inform her choices as she set out to save her mother. She would begin to live her life prospectively with the future in mind. But it's important to note here that the call to act is not overburdened with an abstract idea of resistance or imploded in a grand narrative of freedom and liberation. The injunction to act here is closer to the ground. It is bound up in the effort to respond to those problems that gum up life as it is lived. It emanates from the power of love that has survived the ugliness of this place and blossoms in the heart of a child who dares to imagine herself otherwise. My faith in our ability to engage in self-cultivation on behalf of justice assumes the nastiness of life. Afro-pessimists remind us, or at least me, that we ought not to succumb to the allure of neoliberalism's fantasies. I agree, but like Baby Suggs, I say to them, know it, but going out of the yard. In the end, and I got 2 minutes, the answer to the troubles in this country, as it had always been, and I use troubles on purpose for those of you who know your Irish history, as it has always been, rests with the willingness of everyday people to fight for democracy. Not to outsource the struggle to so-called prophets and heroes, but to realize that the salvation of democracy itself requires, in part, the creation, as Dewey says, of personal attitudes and individual human beings that affirm the dignity and standing of all people. It requires that we understand that democratic flourishing cannot be separated, quote, from the individual attitudes so deep-seated as to constitute character. We must become the kinds of people democracies require, finally. But to be better here, in this place, we must understand and recognize the distorting and disfiguring effect of hatred and fear and the exacting power of love. The world remains a cruel place, that much we know, and the United States today is especially maddening. But the words of the late Toni Morrison, with an exquisite riff on Annie Dillard, seem more resonant than ever. Quote, of course there's cruelty. Cruelty is a mystery, but if we see the world as one long, brutal game, then we bump into another mystery, the mystery of beauty, of light, the canary that sings on the skull. Unless all ages and all races of men have been deluded, there seems to be such a thing as grace, such a thing as beauty, such a thing as harmony, all wholly free and available to us. And with that knowledge, going out the yard, all of us, and fly. Thank you. 2 seconds.
We have our ticket to the future and how we can escape our own cages. Fantastic talk, Eddie. Questions for Dr. Glaude?
You can ask me anything. I won't answer it, but you can ask me anything. Let me put my glasses on so I can see you.
Come on, folks, this is not a timid audience. There we have it, right there, back there.
Yes.
I'm Susan from Massachusetts. That was amazing.
Thank you.
This is very personal, not scholarly, my question, I'm sorry to say, but I know a lot of people who are knowledgeable about what's going on right now and despairing, but convinced that there's no point in taking action. And I'm not you, and I'm not giving that talk to people everywhere. What do you say to people in the moment who ask you, why, how can I do anything?
We cannot afford, as Baldwin would say, an elegant despair. Because they can sit in that space because apparently their lives are okay. The people that they love aren't disappearing. They don't have to worry about their elderly folk who may lose their monthly checks. There's something about the comfort of their lives that may allow for an elegant despair. I think we have to become despairing witnesses, right? I can't ignore the bitterness that's in my gut. I have to say, that the country lied again. Period. And there's no room that I can come in, especially in this building, and not make you feel uncomfortable. Period. So, what I'm trying to do is to open the space for an honest reflection, to release us into a new way of being, because in order for a higher self to come into existence, you have to leave an older self behind. But if you keep telling yourselves lies, you can't do it. You're permanently docked in the station, right? And here we are in this moment. And what I'm trying to do over the course of my own grappling with madness, right, is to keep the bitterness from overwhelming everything. To look at you and not render judgment. But by the grace. Anyway. I should be looking up too. Look at you. No. So much to say.
Eddie, I will venture a question, because I think, as Susan articulated, many people are wondering what they can do, because we are stuck in our own, we have sort of this hyper-knowledge environment, but also we have the luxury to be indifferent. Yeah. How can we escape our own cages of indifference? How can we find, or what tools have you seen that are successful in helping people find ways to make a difference within their scope of knowledge and activity?
It's hard, right? I think, first of all, we have to align our passions with actual organizations on the ground that are doing work. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have to get clear on our conceptions of justice. Oftentimes, we hold a notion of justice with exception. Justice matters over here, but I don't care what they're doing over there, right? So we're willing to ignore, undermining the rule of law under these conditions, but we want it applied to us. Think about the selfishness that emerged once Doge touched all of those policies. Were people crying out before then as a particular community was suffering from a complete disregard for the rule of law? No, they weren't. It only happened when they touched them, right, in so many ways. So get clear on your conception of justice without exception. Align what you're passionate about, whether it be education, whether it be criminal justice reform, whether it be a range of things, with organizations on the ground that's doing that work. But here's something that goes to the personal thing. We got to deal with the intimacy of our hatreds. People know who killed Emmett Till. You know why? They drink beer with them. They played checkers with them. They loved them. You know what you hear around your dinner tables. You know what you hear from the people who you love. And you know that's the soil that makes all of this possible. And so in those intimate spaces, we have to make some choices. It's going to be hard, but that's the only way we can be otherwise. I pray. 0-0.
Yes, yes.